Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Nathan Fink, and this is New Hampshire Family Now, a show about building family in the Granite State. Today on the show, guest co-host Robin D. Almeida crosses the multiverse to save me from myself, and later, Mining for Gold founder Corey Best discusses humanness and the power of relationships. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hey, it's Nathan, co-host of New Hampshire Family Now. I wanted to take a quick break from the show because it occurred to me the other day that I've never asked you to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribing is free, and when you do it, it helps our placement algorithms, making it that much easier for caregivers across New Hampshire to find valuable information and strategies for their families. Also, you'll be alerted when a new episode drops. And if you like the show, leaving a review helps us that much more. So go to wherever you get your podcast, type in New Hampshire Family Now, and as the kids say, smash that subscribe button. I say click it, because if you smash it, then you're going to need a new one. Thank you and enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today on the show, I'm joined by guest co-host Robin D. Almeida, which, if you can't tell, I'm super excited, Robin. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Who's the Communications and Family Engagement Project Director at Parent Information Center. So, you know, I was just upstairs with my son. I texted you that I'm going to be late. We're in a remote situation. We've got snow, endless snow. And it just occurred to me, I literally feel like I just call you when the wheels are coming off.
Same.
I almost feel like, look, it's you and I are kind of the same person in the multiverse, and you're just here to tell me things get weird.
But you know what? I really value the conversations we have for that very reason. And I feel like we all kind of need that, so, hey, my day's crazy. The kids are now home. We were supposed to do the podcast in person. Right. And my daughter just her car was just in a hit and run.
I'm glad you're here. You just kind of dove in a little bit with what's going on. But how is the family? What are you guys working on?
We're doing great. I have one child who's a junior in high school. My oldest is a junior in college. So I'd say right now we're pretty focused on these transitions, these life transitions from high school to life after high school, from college to, the quote unquote real world, and really focusing on how we keep our relationships strong through all those transitions.
Yes.
Right. They need different things from us now than they did when they were younger.
I got to say all of this shifting landscape, and then with developmental milestones, for your kids are not beyond developmental milestones. I don't feel like I am as an adult either, by the way.
Right. We need some milestones. Yeah. So what about you? We haven't really talked in a while. What's your family been up to? Where are your kids at?
Okay, so one, they're huddled in the other room because I tried to stuff as much entertainment in their grill as possible. But I have to say, I'm really thinking about the conversation that I have with Corey on the second half of this podcast. And he cues into a lot of things, but I think what really landed for me, just this conversation around power and how we exercise it. I'm realizing that I, as a parent, have never been intentional about the way I think about power in my relationships.
Yeah.
My son Winnie is who's my youngest, is in this no phase at the exact moment my older son is in this Y phase. And I got to say, I catch myself plowing through the no, and then I catch myself saying, because I said so, for the why.
The power dynamics between parents and children is a really vulnerable, brave thing to explore, right? Because I don't know about you, but I learn a lot about myself. Maybe I feel like it's a little humbling.
Yes, I think that I'm wrestling with just how much value that I'm actually attributing to my son's protests. And then my older son's need for explanation, not nearly enough.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I always just find myself saying like, I've got to make more time. I've got to pause. So there's room to think about exactly what you're saying in the moment.
And I think maybe that's why I'm cueing in on what Corey said, because it hit me in a microcosm. And then he expanded it back out to these greater social systems and patterns. Yeah.
And I think, in systems like education and healthcare, there's already a pretty strong power dynamic at play. Providers and educators are the subject matter experts. They create the system. And as a parent, I have to navigate and communicate and advocate within that system for my children. But at the same time, I'm the expert on my child. So it really takes a strong relationship between families and professionals to shift that dynamic in these systems, right? To a place where everyone has equal power and value on these different teams that we become a part of. Quick example I can give you. I was just talking about this the other day. During COVID, there was an issue with my son's foreign language class. And I was really nervous because we were going into a school year knowing like everyone's remote. He had a new special education case manager that I didn't know. So like, all right, just so much stress, and I was really concerned about his learning. And after some back and forth, I sent a very terse, short email to his team. And his special education case manager called me and said, hey, Robin, I'm new this year and we haven't met, but I want you to know that I grew up in a household where my mom spent our entire childhood advocating for my brother in school so he could reach his full potential. I really get where you're at and we're in this together.
It's easy to feel a lot of things about our relationships, and it can feel like it is so easy for me to feel overwhelmed by the great power I ascribe to a system.
And like what you just mentioned, almost like you're in it. And so you have to like make the time, even though sometimes there's not time. The special ed case coordinator could have easily been like, oh my gosh, this is COVID. I do not have time for another anxious parent. I was really in this place of disempowerment and fear. And she took the time, like you were saying, to stop and think about like, what's the dynamic here? Where is this person at? And, instead of just taking it as a single interaction, like really thinking about the other person's fears or pain points or experiences and saying like, I see you, I understand you.
See, that's what I'm saying. This is where the multiverse comes into play, because you come in, you give me some advice, and you're like, by the way, don't get that piercing, don't get that tattoo. Was there anything we need to know about the Parent Information Center or New Hampshire Family Voices?
We've said this before on the show, but just to give folks like a little bit of a refresher for those who maybe don't know about us, Parent Information Center and New Hampshire Family Voices are sister organizations. Parent Information Center works on education, and Family Voices works on healthcare with families to help them navigate the different systems that we just talked about. And we really focus on helping families and professionals build relationships so that everyone can thrive, families, children, and our providers. So we'd love for you to check us out at picnh.org. And recently we've released a ton of content on family voice, building strong relationships with your providers and those of your children. And for those of you who might have some older children, lots of information on the transition from high school to life after high school.
I love you guys. Keep up the great work. And thank you so much, Robin, for coming on.
Thank you, Nathan.
And when we come back, I interview Corey Best, founder of Mining for Gold. Don't go anywhere. Many thanks to New Hampshire's Office of Social and Emotional Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. Started within New Hampshire's Department of Education, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness consolidates policy development and implements projects and programs that are focused on health and wellness with an emphasis on behavioral health of all students, youth, and families. To learn more about the Department of Education and its many programs and approaches, visit www.education.nh.gov. Today's show was also brought to you by Burgoo Media, a full-service media company dedicated to helping nonprofits realize impact stories for print, video, social, and legacy media, and more. Both budget-conscious and grant-friendly, Burgoo Media helps your organization celebrate the humans in human services. Learn more at burgoomedia.com. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today on the show, I'm excited to welcome Corey Best, who is first and foremost a father, but also the founder of Mining for Gold, an organization focused on racial justice, leadership development, and curating community experiences, and utilizing those ideas and expertise to approach old struggles in new ways. Corey, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you again.
Oh, Nathan, it's a pleasure to be with you. And I always have a wonderful time when we get an opportunity to chop it up.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I've got a lot of things to ask you, but let's hinge in on this idea of curating experiences so to shape new thinking and systems. Can you tell me a little bit about that so I can wrap my head around what it is and how you get there?
Yeah, so the what it is first, but the how you get there is quite magnificent as well, because that requires the people. But we often think about curating in terms of art or artifacts, right? And we're making something whole again or pristine. How I define, or how Mining for Gold defines curating experiences is if you can imagine that we have multi-dimensional worldviews. And so that's the condition. That's our current mosaic, so to speak. What it means is being really intentional about setting and creating and cultivating containers, right? So these containers are synonymous with group meetings. These containers are synonymous with sessions, right? And what we do is we enable participants to grapple with ways of approaching old struggles in new ways. And so what we've come to know is that people make up the system. And so we also have a wide range of beliefs. We often think of gatherings and convenings. And so Mining for Gold facilitates and also strategizes with the relics, the vestiges, the nuances of how we've been constructed and invented as people in these Americas, especially when it comes to race. And so ultimately what it means is an opportunity for us to gather for purpose of unschooling. This purpose of unschooling helps us to build culture, to learn, explore, act, discover, and design in non-linear methodologies that really focus on not only outcomes, but impact. That impacts self, the I-in system, and communities and its members.
As you're describing it, I've got, obviously this organizational component that you talked about. But then also this idea of unschooling, which is, I think, what I want to land on, because yes is my response. Yes. And oh my gosh, is that difficult? Because this takes this moment, a mirror moment, when we really look in and take stock of how we're doing. So how do we do that? And what should we expect of ourselves when we do look deeply in this mirror?
This is a fascinating question for many reasons. One, I grew up in this system, meaning as a professional. So I grew up thinking that there was one way of being, that we should strategize together, we should develop what the matrices are, and we should do things to and for people, rarely with. And rarely, actually, in my environments, did we talk about the work that I, as an individual, needed to do, right? And so that's where I want to start with the mirror. So it requires of us, and I'll just speak from my perspective, right? I don't want to sound prescriptive. For me, looking in the mirror required me to understand, one, that I can no longer rely on my skills, my tools, my ideas in isolation. Because see, I'm taught one way, so I know what I know, and what I know has gotten me positions. What I know has gotten me to this podcast. What I know has gotten me and given me the ability to do things to people and to make people learn or think differently. Now, when it comes to the mirror, notice something about your day, Nathan. You're probably like me in many ways, meaning you're the last person you see at night, and you're probably the last person you look at in the morning, right? Your kids, your significant other, maybe you hit the Zoom room before washing the face, whatever the case may be. But when we look in the mirror gives us a reflection of how we often see ourselves. So we often think about the mirror as it's a look internal. But what the mirror as a metaphor might mean for many people is that I allow people, because I can no longer rely on my own devices to get me places. I rely on you, Nathan, to be the mirror. See, this is where it gets tricky, because the mirror work requires me to build right, accountable relationship with you And you then are able to reflect some things that I may not have ever known about myself, my ways of being, my thinking, my culture, my ideas, my philosophies.
Yeah.
You and I become mirrors to one another. And that's really the mirror work, allowing other people to be that reflector to you. This is what you might be missing. This is what you might need to think about. This is what you might need to do not to cause me harm again. If I'm just looking at myself, guess what I'm seeing? I'm seeing a light-skinned, bald-headed Black man who thinks he's pretty good looking. And that's all I'm seeing, right? That's all I'm seeing, Nathan. But you see something different because I've allowed you to see me in that way. And that is in addition to, and this is where it's hard and heavy, I get to share my traumas with you as well. I get to share my pains, my pain points, my growing edges. And then in that relationship, you help me grow as a person. And then I become something new.
So let me unpack this aloud, if you don't mind, because in my head, every time I hear that saying, what I'm thinking is taking stock of the self. But what I'm also hearing from you is it's impossible to take true stock of the self because you can't literally remove your lenses, the lenses through which you look. And hence, relationships are necessary and critical to further development because you need lenses. You need other lenses. You can't be your best true self unless you allow for other lenses to take stock.
Absolutely right. So it starts with, something happens that causes some intrusive thoughts, some ideas that maybe I should take a deeper look at this or at that within myself. So yes, it starts with looking yourself in the mirror and being willing to allow, and just to use you and I must become willing to allow you to see me. And in seeing me, we create a sense of belongingness.
Now, where we're going with all this is some new ways of thinking about old struggles, and we did mention institutional and systems change. So that means then that we are really talking about the humanness of these systems, and the humanness cannot be human outside of relationships. So how then do we get to that? Where do we go from there?
So this is a messy middle. And many of us run as far and as fast as we can, because when you, my mirror, begin to reveal to me some things that make me uncomfortable, I don't want to hold that change. I want to get rid of it. Right? And so back to the containers, we help to become mature human beings in order to be able to hold and grapple with some of the rigidity of our worldviews, right? The rigidity of how I see myself, the rigidity how I don't allow others in to see my fullness, right? Good or bad, however you want to define that. But I want to talk about this piece about humanness for just a moment. And this is the messy middle, right? So if you could imagine the invention I mentioned earlier, we're all constructed in a way which gives us a worldview about the world and people within that world. So one of the grapplings here with this mirror work, meaning you as my accountability partner, just to use a term that everybody's familiar with, is that some folks, Nathan, have been deemed more human. Let that sit for a moment. Deemed more human. Now, when folk are deemed more human, and in this American society, and I think it's safe to say, we must begin with understanding that white bodies have been standards of measurement for all humanity. So Nathan, if we are outside of who's deemed human, we're seen by society as deviant.
Right.
So how is it then possible for me to be in right accountable relationship with a mom, a dad that's struggling, misusing substances, and may have done something that cuts against the grain of perfection, good, or prevention? It's grappling because my worldview is different. So the ideology, that particular ideology is always the background condition. Now, when I begin with that, I now experience this as something that's texturized, that has weight. I can feel this, and that experience might be unsettling. And as I mentioned, quite intrusive, but the weight has changed me so much at a cellular level, and I may not have even known it until it causes me to behave and react a certain way. So there are some schools of thoughts that have defined what good is, what a good human looks like, right? And we can trace, we know the history, we can see what that person or those persons look like. And our society has a really convoluted relationship with Black bodies. So on one hand, good for service, good for commodity, not good for right accountable relationship, but have not had full access to democracy, full access to resources, full access to use of power and their agency. So this unschooling container is really about how do we invest time and energy in cultivating a more realistic and different assumption about humanity. And that assumption being that individuals are innately capable and gifted and powerful and might even have infinite creativity that actually helps me or my system and institution grow in a different way. So I have to believe new things that are more real about who humans are and what they're capable of. And that's not just my affinity group any longer. I'm more equipped to be in space and right accountable relationship with people who are more like me.
What we're saying then, you have to, one, believe in human capacity, and you have to believe something about power, the root of power and where it comes from and relationships' role in that.
Absolutely, right? So when I hear the word power, I now know, thanks to having people in my life to help me see things differently, as evidenced by, so one, I know that power is relational, right? And so the different relationships either reinforce or disrupt one another, Nathan. Simply put, its importance in the concept of anti-racism, injustice, and humanity is really clear. Injustices can be understood without understanding that power is not only an individual relationship, but a cultural one, and that power relationships are always shifting. Said another way, we often think of power as something that we do or exercise, right? Not often that's something that we wield and even wield unequally based on anything from race to orientation to socioeconomics. That there are some things that our society has naturally attached to certain demographics of people that connote power. Now, what I'm saying, Nathan, is that when we begin to ascribe power to only one or one monoculture, we now have a relationship with power that is excluding folks from their ability to exercise, demonstrate, and live into that infinite creativity that we mentioned. So what I have learned to do is to ascribe power equitably. So I believe that Black and brown communities have always had power. No one can give anybody power that they already have. So power is innate, power is relational, right? Power is within groups. And so we often say in our institutions that we want to empower people. Well, if we want to empower people in the context of injustice, have we now acknowledged that we have disempowered them? And what gives us the ability to do that or the access to do that? It's who's ascribed power to us, right? So it's relational. And the more that we can build relationship with people, the more I ascribe power to you, Nathan, the more I see you as powerful.
Yeah. You know, this is making me consider my role at work, my role in my family, my role in my friend circle, and then ask some questions about, wait, how am I operating and how is that a reflection of what I've been taught?
Right.
Now I'm thinking about my sons. And then it's making me question, how do I see something in others differently and more truly?
You're hitting it for me at least, right? And so I know that we had talked about, well, what does it all mean in the service of what? So to just go through a quick list, it may not be what we need to not become. The service is for us as people. So the interpersonal self. And what does presencing justice look like in the relationship between you and your boys and me and my son? That's a tough stretch because I'm a father of a 13-year-old kid. And you know what, Nathan? I've been told about my position as a father that I got some rights and some entitlements and some authority over what the hell he does. And of course, I want to exercise that power, often without realizing that I'm abusing the power because he already has been given some information about fatherhood himself. So he already comes into this world with these notions that I am power in his life, but not that I should abuse that power in any way. So it sort of counters his growing perception of what his role even is in a relationship. And sometimes when I'm only exercising power, I am not becoming oriented to his needs. I'm not becoming oriented to his dreams. I am not becoming oriented to how to unschool myself before deploying strategies to fix a behavior that I deem unhealthy, not necessary, bad even. I get to say so based on what the world has told me about my entitlements as a dad. And I hope that we can take that example and look at what's happening in our institutions. Paternalistic approaches has always been some studies around that, right? So I'd like to, if we're talking about just parenthood for a moment, I'd like to build culture with my child. And as I build culture with my child, we can confront some constraints and some realities. And if that's the lessons I'm giving my child in his life today, and he grows up to lead an organization, I might be planting the seed today because this race of justice is not one that's going to be seen or lived or actualized in my life, but I may be passing the baton to him and planting seeds for the future.
Yeah. Listening to you speak, it just occurred to me. We like to see ourselves in the chain of events. And it just occurred to me that we are the chain.
Absolutely.
And that type of thinking echoes out to our relationships in the workplace, in society, and in these different relationships. So what kind of things in those relationships, when we are seeking to be a more reflective and vulnerable mirror to someone else, what is it that we can do to essentially affect that relationship positively?
Yeah, I heard you mention a word, empathy, right? It's a value, it's a principle. And if we're really traveling with this notion of mirror, meaning not just how I see myself, how others might see me and how I've allowed others, those are all actions, right? And so we minimize where we are acting and using areas of elasticity and discretion in our work. We have been told that all of our actions should have grandiose outcomes and measures, right? I want us to try to think about detaching from the outcome and attaching to the process. We can measure, we have markers along the way. What are our relationships impacting and how are they impacting people's lives that you work for, that you manage, that you govern, that you supervise, what have you? But back to empathy for a moment. There's a term that Cornel West uses, and it's universal application of empathy. So one, love fits everywhere, Nathan, right? Love fits everywhere. The challenge in these relationships is often seeing the view from the other side. So as an example, how we begin to see the view from the other side is starting with different questions and also different assumptions. And so if we're in an institution, in today's times where a lot of us are focused on anti-racism and racial justice and how we do things differently for communities, but rarely how we do things differently internal to the institution. So we can no longer start the conversation with the arrows of Native Americans, for an example. We must begin to start the conversation with forced assimilation, genocide, European domination, and colonialism. That gives us of you from the other side. We can no longer start the conversation with Black poverty if we're talking about upstream work and prevention and concrete supports, right? We must begin to start with enslavement, forced captivity, racial terror, and being excluded from every social system up to the 1960s. When we change our vantage point, only then will we know what we feel and believe about humanity.
Now, if people want to learn more about what you do, where can they go?
They can go to miningforgoldcommunity.com. And of course, all the other social handles at Mining for Gold, Twitter, and Mining for Gold, LinkedIn, and all the other things out there.
Corey Best, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate the conversation. We got into a lot.
Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.